What if I told you you can play the bass better than one of the most iconic bassists of all time? You wouldn't believe me, right? Well, I'm right, and I'm gonna prove it to you in this video. Today we are diving in the world of punk rock to uncover the story of Sid Vicious, the most famous bassist who couldn't play bass. How did he become such an iconic bassist despite having no musical skills? Let's slap into it. In 1977, a punk band called Sex Pistols fired their original bassist, Glenn Matlock, because he was too mainstream for their punk image. The band started to look for a new, more fitting bassist. Luckily, frontman Johnny Rotten had a friend who had the look, the attitude, and the perfect punk vibe. That friend was Sid Vicious. But there was one small issue. Sid couldn't actually play bass. Sid was chosen because he looked the part. His bass playing was almost non-existent. The truth is, he was more about being seen than being heard. In a band famous for its raw, unpolished sound, Sid's lack of musical skill was both a joke and a scandal. During live shows, his bass was often turned down or even completely turned off. He's playing all the right notes, but not necessarily in the right order. As word spread about Sid's inability to play, drama erupted. Fans questioned how someone with no real talent could be the bassist for one of the most famous punk bands. Was Sid just a puppet, a marketing tool to sell the punk image? The fact that Sid Vicious couldn't play bass was both an open secret and a running joke. It challenged the authenticity of Sex Pistols. Were they really about the music, or was it all just a spectacle? Many fans felt betrayed by a band that claimed to reject mainstream superficiality, but seemed to embrace it with Sid. Others saw Sid's incompetence as the ultimate symbol of punk defiance. Inside the music studio, the truth was unavoidable. Sid's attempts to record bass parts were often so bad they were unusable, to the point where Steve Jones, the band's guitarist, stepped in to record nearly all the bass tracks on their studio album. Never mind the bollocks, here's the Sex Pistols. Sid was a disaster in the studio. He just didn't have the skills. We'd let him try, but in the end, Steve played almost all the bass parts. The album wouldn't have happened if we'd relied on Sid. For Sid, this was a source of frustration. He was the bassist in one of the most notorious bands of the time, yet he wasn't allowed to actually play. This added to his sense of isolation and fueled the destructive behavior that would come to define his short life.
The Sex Pistols.
Despite his lack of musical talent, Sid Vicious became a legend. His image, spiked hair, leather jackets, and a perpetual snarl became synonymous with punk, but this only deepened the controversy. Was Sid's fame based on nothing more than style over substance? And what did this say about the punk movement itself? Sid represented the raw energy of punk, unfiltered, unrefined, and unskilled. In a way, he was the perfect icon for a style that prided itself on breaking all the rules. But it also raised uncomfortable questions about whether punk was more about attitude than actual music. As the Sex Pistols gained notoriety, Sid's life began to spiral out of control. His relationship with Nancy Spungen became infamous and fueled his descent into addiction and violence. Sid and Nancy were like a car crash in slow motion. They were inseparable, but their relationship was toxic, pushing Sid deeper into drug addiction and self-destruction. The Sex Pistols' chaotic US tour in 1978 marked the beginning of the end. Sid was often stumbling on stage, barely able to play, but for the audience, his presence was more about the spectacle than the music. On October 12, 1978, Nancy Spungen was found dead in the Chelsea Hotel, New York, with a single stab wound. Sid was arrested and charged with her murder. but he never stood trial, because 4 months later, on February 2, 1979, Sid Vicious died of a drug overdose. Sid's death at 21 cemented his status as a punk rock martyr. To many, he was a tragic figure, a young man who became a symbol of a movement that chewed him up and spat him out. In the end, Sid Vicious remains one of the most enduring symbols of punk, not for his music, but for what he represented: rebellion, chaos. His inability to play bass has become a key part of his legend, a story that continues to fascinate and provoke debate. Sid's story is a paradox. He couldn't play bass, yet he is one of the most famous bassists in rock history. It's a statement to the power of image and to the idea that sometimes being good at something isn't as important as what you represent. Even though many people like to joke about him, at the end of the day, he was just a kid who was thrown into something too big for him. He tried to keep up until he couldn't hold the immense expectations and pressure anymore. So this was the story of the most famous bassist who couldn't play bass. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this kind of video and if you'd like to hear more bass stories like this one. And in the meanwhile, thank you for the support. Stay funky, bros.